Okay, now before I take another video and rip it a new arsehole, which I can't stand disinformation, especially when this person writes quite a lot of photography books, and that sort of misinformation, to me anyway, or anybody else with a brain for that matter, is horrific. But let's first examine crop sensor versus full frame. What has changed in the past 10 years or so, and why full frame versus crop sensor doesn't really matter anymore. It does to a very small extent. Obviously, SNR gain with a larger photo site is obviously superior, but something radio astronomy figured out basically 30 years ago, partial response maximum likelihood, that using SNR firmware and software, that you didn't need huge dishes, or in this case pertaining to photography, you don't need large photo sites anymore. You just don't. Now, as is the case with I believe it's the Canon 5D, which specs out at like 50.1 megapixels. Yeah, 51 megapixels, excuse me. Technically the sensor, I think it's rated for like 58, but it's sampled at that. Now it has a pixel pitch of 4.14 micrometers. I'll talk about that in a second. Let's first ask a question and know what it is we're talking about. Now here, let's assume this is a full frame sensor, and this is a DX sensor. Now this isn't exactly to scale, but it is. So we know we have a 1.5 crop factor here. Now the actual square area is 2.3 times larger on the DX sensor than it is a full frame. So we have our DX sensor here, we have our full frame sensor here. Okay, now as I mentioned to you before, this sounds somewhat obtuse, but it is the case. It doesn't matter what sort of camera you got or what sort of sensor you got underneath it. No lens gives a shit what size sensor is sitting underneath it. Okay, they all crap out the same light at the exact same luminal density per square millimeter. We'll get back to that in a second. So here we have 2.3 times bigger than the full frame sensor. 2.3 times bigger than the DX sensor, excuse me. Now let's take a look at the back. Now we know the crop factor, 2.3 times larger. A crop factor of 1.5 is the case with Nikon, not with Canon, which is right near 1.6. So let's take a look at the other aspect. That this other person, him and his wife, have done a few videos comparing the full frame sensors with DX sensors, and they're just full of so many errors. It's like, where do you even stop? I mean, I actually have to stop the video. Now, I made a bunch of videos refuting most of their claims about 4 or 5 months ago, but I found out on one of Zach Arias's his personal blog, he kind of wanted to say this is nonsense, but he didn't. But he gave some examples about why they're wrong. Now, he didn't mention any specifics in the video, but he did mention the video, but I'm going to get into some specifics. Now, I don't need to name this person or attack this person, the husband and wife team that are making this erroneous video. However, I am miffed, and I don't like misinformation, especially still further is the case that before stating all this information, someone directs you to their book that they're selling on Amazon.com. You know, if you're going to write a book, you need to get at least your facts right, unless you're writing, you know, a fiction book or sci-fi about aliens and women in metal bikinis sitting in the laps of Jabba the Hutt, in which case you can write all the incorrect information that you want. So here we're looking at two aspects. I like to keep this simple. I've tried to think of various ways to actually dumb this down to the point where you can still translate the point and not get too complicated where people roll their eyes in the back of their head. And the simplest way I can think of, nobody else has thought of this, is you need to think of your sensor and your crop factor two different ways, and I'm going to simplify this and make it really easy for you to understand because so many people scratch their heads over it. You got two aspects to your sensor that you need to consider, okay? DX here, you got a crop factor of 1.5, but the total area here between DX and full frame is 2.3 times larger, okay? Now we know that. Crop factor 1.5, and this, okay, this total, full frame, 2.3 times larger. That's one aspect. Now let's look at the other aspect. You can't see it, but the actual pixel pitch, for example, say between a Nikon D7100 and a Nikon D810 is roughly right about 20% smaller. In other words, these little circles here, which of course would be measured in micrometers, and the difference between the Nikon D7100, for example, which is 3.9 micrometer pixel pitch, which is the distance between one photosite to the next. The pixel pitch on the D810 is 4.8 micrometers. Now you have to ask yourself why bird photographers that make their livelihood, their bread and butter off shooting, I don't know, a speckled-breasted woodpecker at 1,000 yards away using a $19,000 lens are not using a Nikon D810. Why? Bird shooters and wildlife shooters in general, obviously you're shooting a lion 1,000 yards away. You can't get that close to the critters, okay? You know that, I know that. So why the hell are people that are professional wildlife photographers, especially professional bird shooters, that are using a 19,000... Money's no object, okay? This is their bread and butter. They got to get a picture of the speckled-bellied woodpecker 1,000 yards away over there, okay, pecking away at the tree. Why are they using a Nikon D7100 or another, whichever is their best? D7100 ranks right up near the top, by the way, by their own admission. Why are they using a $600 Nikon D7100 versus a Nikon D810? Pixel pitch. They crop the crap out of their pictures. They might use, say this is a picture of the woodpecker here, right here. Okay, they're going to have to crop the hell out of the shot. The rest of it's going to be tossed away. Obviously, they're going to shoot it in RAW. This is why it's so incredibly important to be shooting in RAW. There's an idiot here on YouTube, not the husband and wife team, but another fool. He says, I only shoot in JPEG. The guy's got hundreds of videos, and he's only got like 3,000 subscribers, and I don't give a damn how many subscribers he has. But he only has that because he keeps telling everybody why he shoots in RAW, why he shoots in JPEG, and why JPEG... Someone actually called me yesterday from Boston, a very funny guy, to tell me about this person. It's like, I've never heard of this person. So I watched his 2 videos about why he shoots in... I only shoot in JPEG, and JPEG's best, and it makes you a better shooter, and... You know, it's ridiculous, okay? There are 3 places where gain occurs. The gain occurs at the sensor, SNR firmware, and which is the most important part. Partial response, maximum likelihood. Noise actually has a frequency, okay? And then the second part is where it's important to shoot in RAW, is in post, okay? At the point of your computer. It doesn't occur in the camera. Now, you cannot change the SNR firmware. It's unalterable. I'm not talking about the actual firmware that you update for fixes on your camera. When they actually fix a little glitch or something, you're able to update the firmware on your Nikon camera, whatever the hell camera it is that you're using. I'm actually talking about the non-rewritable SNR firmware. Like when someone comes out with a new camera, Canon comes out with a new camera, first thing Nikon does, or anybody else, is they tear it apart. They don't give a damn what sensors in it. They know about all the parts that are in there. The one thing that Nikon disassembles Canon's cameras, and Canon disassembles Nikon's cameras when they come out, the one thing that they only give a shit about inside that camera to backwards engineer it is the AD converters and the SNR firmware. That's where all the advances are occurring. Now, a lot of your professionals out there will tell you, A, you need to be shooting in RAW, obviously, but technology changes. For example, current RAW processing applications, whether you're Mac or PC, is changing. It is improving. There might be a time 5 years from now when that picture you thought that was so important turned out shitty due to a bad illumination or whatever. It might happen that improved RAW converters will come out, and you'll be able to take that image that was unrecoverable, RAW by the way, and it might be a recoverable image. So that's why you need to archive your RAW files and not toss them. The post gain and RAW converter software applications are getting better. So a quick look at that again. We'll get into more depth on this in the next video. I tried to figure out a way to dumb this down simple enough that everybody would get it. Okay, first thing you need to understand, nobody talks about this, is that there's 2 aspects to your sensor. And of course there are 3 places of gain, but we're only talking about gain in one spot right now. Now we're talking about crop factor. Obviously crop factor 1.5, total area size of 2.3 times larger. But additionally so, we have a pixel pitch. Now say this is a D7100 right here, and the photo sites are about 20% smaller. Okay, and this is a D810 full frame sensor up here. It is 2.3 times larger, but its pixel pitch is about 20% worse. 4.8 micrometers versus 3.9. This is why the guy with a $19,000 lens is taking a picture of the red speckle-breasted woodpecker at 1,000 yards, where money is no object. He's not using a D810, which is a 36 megapixel sensor. Well, why not? Why is he using a 24 megapixel sensor, the Nikon D7100? Because the pixel pitch is smaller. He crops the hell out of his shot. He needs more information per square millimeter. More information per square millimeter. Crop versus pixel pitch in micrometers. Which is more important? What depends on what you're going to do. If you can take a portrait shot and you use 80% of the shot, you just crop a little bit of the crap out. Oh, awesome. You can make a big ass print. You can still make a beautiful 20 by 30 print, 10 years ago with a 12 megapixel camera. But, you've got a lot more to mess around with. And if you want to crop the hell out of it as a full frame image, that's great. But the pixel pitch is such that there's more information per square millimeters hitting this sensor between like a Nikon D7100, for example, and a Nikon D810. The question is, which would you rather have to go out with a 500 millimeter f2.8 to shoot birds with? A Nikon D810 at 36 megapixels or a Nikon D7100 at 24 megapixels? You would think, well, I'd rather have the 36 megapixels. Nikon D810. No, you would want the Nikon D7. Well, why wouldn't you? Well, this is a 36 megapixel sensor. Why would I want the 24? Pixel pitch. Okay? Bird photographers know this. Now, here's something else that this person, the husband and wife team, in the next video, I will get into quoting him and the errors that he makes. And I don't care if someone makes errors. By God, if you'd be writing photography books and talking about them on Amazon.com, at least get your stuff right. Now, it has been said a number of times, and that's what pisses me off the most, and I'll be talking about this and going into the details of it in the next video, is that people talk about, well, like a particular article, and the person that made those videos, the husband and wife team, says larger sensors give you a clear advantage in that they have more surface area to collect light, and thus better sensitivity. Well, that's bullshit. It's bullshit. Well, it can't be true. You got a gigantic magnifying lens, which is the case. A gigantic magnifying lens, you can actually burn right through steel just using sunlight. You got a tiny magnifying lens, you could burn little ants. You got a giant magnifying lens or a Fresnel element, you can burn through steel. So obviously the larger it is, the more light it gathers. Well, let's start thinking about camera sensors here. You're not interested about the totality of what is captured here. It's like, well, this is a larger sensor, and this little DX sensor is if this is 1, okay, this is 2.3 times larger on the full frame sensor, than the DX sensor. We don't give a damn about the totality of the light. You see all those little circles there? We're interested in every little endless million points of light. We're not interested in the totality of the light. We're only interested in the detail captured per square millimeter and the gain or intensity, but that's due to exposure, ISO, aperture, and shutter speed on your camera. We're not interested in the totality of the light. People think, well, I'm a ham radio operator, and of course you got a satellite dish on your house probably. And as is the case, this broadcast from space. Doesn't matter if it's light, and it doesn't matter if it's radio waves. Well, I got a little satellite dish over here. It doesn't have anywhere near as much gain as this huge satellite dish. You see those at like TV stations that are actually getting signals from outer space. Like your Dish Network TV is broadcasting at 5 watts in the 400 megahertz range. You got a little satellite dish on the back of your house. It's got decent reception, but when it rains, things turn to shit. Well, those giant satellite dishes at radio stations are that big for a reason. They have to have perfect, uninterrupted signals. But we're talking about one signal here. It doesn't work the same way in photography, okay? The bigger sensor doesn't matter for shit because you're interested not in the totality of the light, but in every little spot of light on here. And that has to do with gain, and that has to do with photo sites, and it has to do with SNR firmware. Let's get into the details in a secondary video, and then we'll explain everything. I hope I've dumbed it down enough to make it simple enough to understand. And I did have to repeat myself on this video to make it perfectly clear. But I'll make it even clearer in the next video, okay? I promise. Bye.